Kids for Hire. Written by Meredith Costain. Chapter 1. An Unlucky Kick. Kick it to me, Felix, called Andy. No, over here, called Marco. Kick it to me. Felix looked down at the ball at his feet. Then he glanced at the group of boys in front of him. If he didn't kick the ball soon, Johnny would get it away from him. The other team would score another goal. He closed his eyes and kicked hard. A beautiful kick. The ball sailed through the air. Over Andy's head. Over Marco's outstretched arms. Right through the window of the house next door. Oh no, cried Felix. The house belonged to old Mrs. Mangle. The meanest, nastiest person in the whole street. The front door opened. Mrs. Mangle appeared on the doorstep. She was covered from head to toe in white flour. It made her look like a ghost. She waved her skinny arms angrily and shouted at the boys. Flour flew everywhere. Who broke my window? She squawked. Felix slowly raised his hand. Me, he squeaked. Mrs. Mangle held up Felix's soccer ball. It was completely covered in flour too. Your ball went right through my window and landed in the pie I was making for dinner, screeched the old woman. Now I've got no dinner and no window. She glared at Felix. What have you got to say for yourself, young man? Felix looked at the bits of glass lying on the lawn. Then he glanced around at his mates. Most of them looked like they wanted to go home. Marco and Johnny were already climbing onto their mountain bikes. May I have my ball back, please? No, you may not. And what about apologizing? You can pay for my window. I'm coming over to see your parents, right now. Chapter 2. Money-making ideas. Felix and Andy leaned heavily against the front fence of Andy's house, watching people go by. It's not fair, moaned Felix. It'll take months to save up enough pocket money to pay for Mrs. Mangle's window. Years, probably. Johnny and Marco rode up on their bikes. Hey, guys, said Felix. What's up? We're heading up Hangman's Hill. Ricky and Duke are meeting us there, said Johnny. See you, Marco called back over his shoulder. Losers. Andy and Felix watched them ride off round the corner, pedaling furiously. They both sighed as the bikes disappeared. Wish we had mountain bikes, said Andy. Me too, said Felix. All summer Johnny and Marco had been going on about how good it was heading up Hangman's Hill. But it was a dirt track, and they needed mountain bikes to ride to the top. How much do mountain bikes cost? Asked Andy. More than we've got, answered Felix. But I'll never be able to afford one. Not now I have to pay for Mrs. Mangle's window. Me either, sighed Andy. Not since I broke Mom's favorite vase playing catch inside. What we need is lots of money. Fast. Yes, agreed Felix. But how do we get it? Andy scratched his head. Got any rich relations? People in books and on TV are always getting money left to them by rich relations. Felix shook his head. No. Have you? Andy sighed. No. The two boys kicked at stones on the footpath. They watched sadly as two more of their friends rode up the street toward Hangman's Hill, waving as they flashed past, their pedals whizzing like a fairground ride. Felix's little sister, Flip, skipped up with her friend, Cindy. "Why aren't you out with your friends?" asked Flip. "Because they've got bikes and we haven't," said Felix. "Now go away." "You could get a part-time job," she suggested. "You could save up for one." "That would take years," said Felix. "Not if it was a good job," said Flip. "We'll help. We could have a job club." "Do things with girls?" snorted Andy. "No way." "But I've got lots of ideas," insisted Flip. "We could collect bottles and cans and take them to the recycling center." "The Scouts do that every week," said Andy. "There'd be none left for us." "Okay then," said Flip. "We could write letters for busy people." "You're kidding," Felix retorted. "I hate writing letters. Anyway, Andy can't spell." "No," said Cindy. "We could set up a lending library with all our books and comics. Then we could charge people to borrow them." "People would never bring them back," said Felix. "That's a crazy idea." "Then what about a car wash?" said Cindy, in despair. "Everyone needs their car washed." "Your ideas are useless," said Felix. "Why don't you just get lost?" "You're wrong," said Flip. "A car wash is an excellent idea. Come on, Cindy. If they don't want to do that, we'll start our own car wash." "I'll bet they don't get one car in their silly old car wash," said Felix. "They might," said Andy doubtfully, looking out at the street. "There are lots of dirty cars around here." "No way," said Felix. "They're girls, aren't they? Girls never have good ideas." He bent down to pick up something from the front lawn. "But I do." Chapter 3. The Paper Route. Andy stared at Felix. "A paper route?" "Sure," said Felix. "Lots of people get their papers delivered. We could do that and it'd pay well." "But someone's already doing it," said Andy, pointing to the rolled-up newspaper in Felix's hand. "In this street they are," said Felix. "But they might need people to deliver papers in other areas around here. Let's go inside and call the newsdealer." Andy looked up the newsdealer's number in the directory and Felix dialed it. He spoke to the newsdealer for a few minutes, then turned back to Andy. "This is our lucky day," Felix told his friend. "Why?" asked Andy. "The kid who does the number 2 route broke his leg riding his skateboard yesterday and has to give up his job. Mr. Poulos says we can start tomorrow." "Great," said Andy. "What time?" 6 o'clock, said Felix. 6 o'clock, gulped Andy. "Mr. Poulos wants us to help him sort the papers," Felix explained. "We have to deliver them all by 7. He says that people like to read them on their way to work, but it's still dark then," moaned Andy. He hated getting up early. "You want a bike, don't you?" Felix reminded him. "And it's not far to the newsdealer. It's just around the corner from my house." That night Andy stayed at Felix's place. Felix borrowed his father's alarm clock. He wanted to make sure he and Andy woke up on time. They didn't want to be late on their first day. Felix set the alarm for 5:30 a.m. Then Andy and Felix made up a bed on Felix's bedroom floor for Andy, and they went to bed very early. Felix's mother came in and told the boys not to talk for long, or they'd be too tired to do the paper round in the morning. After his mother had turned out the bedroom light, Felix told Andy his best scary stories. Then Andy told Felix his funniest jokes. They talked about all the fun they would have on their new bikes. At midnight, the boys were still awake. "I'm hungry," said Andy. "Me too," said Felix. They climbed out of bed and crept into the kitchen. Felix made them both peanut butter and banana sandwiches with chocolate spread. Then they both went back to bed and finally fell fast asleep. Felix was dreaming that a monster was jumping up and down on top of him. He opened one eye. His little sister, Flip, was jumping up and down on top of him. "Felix, wake up," she yelled in his ear. "It's 7 o'clock. You've slept in." Felix looked over at Andy. He was snoring loudly. "Andy," he yelled. "Wake up!" The boys pulled on their clothes and raced out the front door. Mr. Poulos was standing out the front of his shop waiting for the boys. "You're late," he roared. "Sorry, Mr. Poulos," said Felix. "It won't happen again. We promise." Mr. Poulos snorted. Then he handed the boys a bundle of newspapers and a list. "There are 2 types of papers," he explained. "Some people get the Morning Sun, some get the Greenfield Gazette. Some get both. Whatever you do, do not mix them up." It took most of the morning to deliver the papers. Andy kept getting the streets mixed up. Felix found it hard to read Mr. Poulos's writing. "What does this say? Number 1 or number 7? He asked Andy. Andy studied the list. "I'm not sure," he answered at last. "Why don't we leave a paper at both houses?"